Yeah, so let's start at the beginning. So I grew up in London, but I sort of grew up traveling. My parents were sort of quite adventurous and creative, and we sort of traveled around the world. My grandparents lived in Australia, so it was sort of an excuse to do a round the world trip, if you see what I mean, because you're going to Australia from the UK, it's like might as well stop off everywhere. Um, So yeah, I had quite a happy childhood. I think my parents instilled this sort of sense of adventure in me, and sort of gave me quite a wide, uh, sort of practical sort of education. I think, but I did go to school in the UK, and yeah, I had quite a happy childhood. One story that my parents like to tell is that I would sort of stare out my window at night and watch the planes like go by with their little blinking lights and sort of just do this. Like I don't know what I was trying to do, but yeah, sort of this fascination at the world. Um, but then, sort of at some point, I was quite young, and I had this kind of weird moment. I was watching a documentary on dinosaurs, as you do as a child, and there was sort of this horrible image of this dinosaur drinking at a lake that had been infected with something and then dying. And at this point, I was watching it, and something really like hit me quite hard, and I was like, okay, hold on, like something's really wrong with the world. Like, how can this sort of beautiful dinosaur just like die? I mean, I know it was in the TV and CGI, but how can it sort of die? What's wrong with the world? I became like sort of quite hyper aware of mortality and illness, and yeah, at quite a young age. So that was a sort of midlife crisis at 6. So I couldn't quite shake this feeling. My days were full of activities, and I was lucky to do sort of music classes on the weekends, and sort of after school activities, kung fu, whatever, you know. Um, but sort of at night, I would just stay up, and I was sort of rigid with fear. Like I didn't understand what it was all about. And sort of no one around me seemed to have the answers. The adults just sort of got on with it. Um, and yeah, so I started sort of distracting myself. I would just sort of stay up until I couldn't keep my eyes open. And as I grew up, the distractions got better and better. So it started with like reading books secretly at night under my blanket, and then sort of audio books on cassette. I listened to Narnia like 17 times all the way through. And then I got a Nintendo DS, and then an iPad, so like sort of an amazing pleasure palace, like anything you want all the time. And I was spending like every spare moment on a screen, sort of like at school, like at night. Yeah, definitely. I was staying up like until 5 a.m. and then going to school at like 8 the next day. I don't really know how I was surviving, but but I was somehow functioning. Yeah, and I was sort of numbing myself to life, and this became quite apparent when one of my grandparents died, and I just I just didn't. I mean, I was definitely old enough to have felt something. I was like 13, and just didn't feel anything, and it was quite weird because the rest of my family were like really upset, and I sort of thought, I should probably be upset. Like I thought, yeah. Anyways, but I didn't feel anything. My body was like completely numb, and I was like, that's not very good. And then later on, I had a couple more incidents like this when I sort of had a breakup, and again just like didn't feel anything. Was sort of like semi worried about this, but then also thought it was a bit of a superpower because I just didn't. I didn't have to do the feeling thing that other people did. But yeah, I still sort of had this question that would come whenever I wasn't on a screen. And at some point towards the end of secondary school, sort of A-level time, I just decided, I know, I just need to be successful. I need to make something of myself. So I started doing pretty well academically, getting really into science, which I actually found quite a lot of joy in. But yeah, also just I wanted money, so I thought that was the way to go. But then even like, achieving high grades or, passing exam, I was just like, didn't feel anything. I sort of was working really hard and then just like would pass an exam and be like, okay. Yeah, and then I got to uni, and I think at some point I started being like, this can't be it, really. Like, I'm sort of working really hard, spending like hours in the library. I just like, what is this about, honestly, if I can't actually even be happy when I do achieve. Or yeah, I mean, or like going on the tube, sort of having these weird moments where I'd be looking around me at like all these adverts for stuff, and like everyone just looked miserable. It's London, like everyone just looks miserable. And I was like, oh God, there must be more to life than this. Yeah, so that's when I sort of started a search. I initially dabbled in psychedelics. Because actually that at my uni there was a sort of department that was doing that, and it seemed to have a lot of scientific backing, so that was a good way into the spiritual world. Also around that same time, meditation was becoming popular and scientifically approved. So I don't really remember that well how it happened at first, but I've been doing some headspace meditations, and then I don't know, I think a friend's mum probably recommended the Buddhist Centre, and because I lived in East London, it wasn't far, it wasn't much of an effort to go. And so I sort of came to the Buddhist Centre, and then for some reason I came back, and kept coming back. Something was definitely drawing me there. But I did come with the mind of a sort of a skeptic. I was scientifically trained, so I was like looking for things that were wrong. But like I said, meditation was scientifically approved. So, and then they started saying things that seemed pretty true, pretty right. Like, getting rid of greed, hatred, delusion, seemed like a good thing. More peace would be nice. And then, I'd go to these Dharma talks, and all these people who I'd never met, like, seemed to know exactly how my mind worked. It's like, okay, what's going on here? And then all these order members that I'd see around just looked really at ease and just like seemed like just completely fine with life. I was like, okay, they've obviously figured out something, and a lot of them looked really youthful as well, sort of like full of energy, like very unlike people that I'd been seeing on the tube in London. Then sort of, as I attended more and more, strange things started happening. Like these habits that I'd gotten into, with the screens, they started to loosen a bit, and I started to be kind of okay with not spending all my time plugged in, listening to something or watching something. I feel a bit more free to change, like a bit more in control of my life. And then the numbness started to fade, the emotional numbness, which was a bit of a double-edged sword, because then I had to like feel my emotions. And some of them, weren't particularly pleasant. But I was actually quite glad for the sort of whole range of human experience. And then I had these really weird, quite powerful moments, spiritual experiences, of being like completely fine with the world. It's a bit hard to describe, but I remember this one time I was on Old Street, which is, I don't know if any of you have been there, but it's not particularly relaxing. And I was listening to this Tibetan Buddhist mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, and it was just sort of repeating, and then suddenly, like, the world was like filled with this light. The sun was there, but it was sort of filled with another kind of light, and this sort of like, everything seemed to be made of this sort of gold, and I just had this like love for everything in my experience, and sort of the question of any sort of meaning of life was just like not important or like intrinsic in the experience, or anyways, it is hard to describe, but sort of these powerful experiences. So when I first came to the Buddhist Center, I was pretty introverted. I still am, actually, but then I started like making friends. At first I was a little bit freaked out by these people who would sort of like stare at you in the eyes and go, It's like, what are you doing? Just stare at the floor like a normal person. But then, you might have seen like the Metta Bhavana started doing its magic. I sort of like was more and more okay with like actually having quite deep conversations with people. It was like I was seeing other people for the first time or something, like, or seeing them again for the first time. It was quite an experience. And then outside of the Buddhist Center, my connections with my friends and family were starting to deepen. And yeah, I sort of built this sort of network of people that even when things were rough, I felt supported and didn't need to escape into screens as much. So yeah, I guess I'll sort of conclude. Yeah, I mean, it also hasn't been like amazingly easy. Like the skeptic does sometimes come out very strongly. That's just things that I have to deal with. But I feel like the fact that I'm still here, even though there's been many times where I've like doubted what I'm doing, and the fact that I'm still here and it's such a positive environment, and I can feel myself getting more and more free and closer to peace every time I step into my difficulties in like a retreat like this. It's just really a testament to how the Dharma works, and yeah, it's definitely worked for me. So thank you.